Hi, friends, and welcome to another story time. Today's story time is about the lighthouse keeper. Let's get started. The Lighthouse Keeper's Picnic. The Lighthouse Keeper's Picnic by Rhonda and David Armitage. Mr. Grinling was a lighthouse keeper. He lived with his wife, Mrs. Grinling, and their cat, Hamish, in a little white cottage on the cliffs. When he was a younger man, Mr. Grinling used to row out to the lighthouse every morning to clean and polish the light. Now he had an assistant called Sam. Some days Mr. Grinling was the lighthouse keeper, and some days it was Sam. On his days off, there were lots of things Mr. Grinling liked to do. He liked playing hide and seek with Hamish. "Peepo, Hamish, I can see you." He liked growing geraniums and heliotropes. He liked singing loudly in the village choir. But most of all, he liked eating. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a few little snacks in between. Eating was what he did best. Sometimes while he ate, he would hum a little tune. "This breakfast should help my singing, Mrs. G. First-class geraniums, these." Mrs. Grinling worried about the eating. "Mr. G, don't you think perhaps you're just a bit too rotund?" she asked. "I don't know how you're going to run races at the village picnic tomorrow." Mr. Grinling gazed at himself in the mirror. "Nonsense, Mrs. G," he said as he did up his shirt, but he went outside to practice his running before dinner. Mr. Grinling loved the village picnic. All the villagers came, big ones and little ones, running and skipping, huffing and puffing. Mrs. Grinling always prepared a splendid picnic spread, and she always kept it as a surprise. The picnic day started badly for the Grinlings. They woke up at 9 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock. In the rush, Mr. Grinling tripped over Hamish. Hamish hid behind the sofa. They were halfway across the bay before they remembered he was still at home, and halfway across again when they remembered the second lunch basket. They were very late for the picnic, and they forgot to tie up the dinghy. Everybody was lining up for the egg and spoon race when they arrived. Mr. Grinling ran as fast as he was able, but he still came last. He and Joe Jenkins tripped over each other in the three-legged race. As for the last race, he couldn't even fit into the sack, let alone jump. "Bad luck, old chap. You would have been good in a tug-of-war." Mr. Grinling was very upset. He stomped off to swim by himself before lunch. He lay on his back with his tummy in the air. Up above, a rainbow balloon drifted. Mr. Grinling sighed. That would be the life, floating just like a cloud. That's what he'd really like to do. He sang a floating song to himself. "High in the sky, gently cruising, wrapped up in cotton wool, quietly musing, singing a cloud song." The picnic lunches were magnificent. Mr. Grinling wandered about, tasting a little bit here, a little bit there, but he stopped quite still when he saw Mrs. Grinling's spread. Naughty nibbles, bumper bites, tempting treats for tinies. Seafood, she had called it, and it was beautiful. Mr. Grinling ate a piece of everything. "Delicious and delectable," he announced with his mouth full of green whale jelly. "The best cook here today, Mrs. G. Possibly the best cook in the whole wide world." Melon boat, limpet log, lighthouse cake, salad crab, great green whale jelly, starfish sandwiches, scallop sausages, cream whirls. Once the picnic was eaten, everyone was too full to run or jump any more. Most of the villagers packed up their baskets and went happily home. Mr. and Mrs. Grinling felt like a rest. They lay in the sun with their heads under their hats and quietly snored. Hey, buzz off, Bert, this is mine. Drat that cat, he spoiled our lunch. Meow, don't you fat cat me. Gosh, old fat cat can move. When they awoke, the sun was beginning to fade. The tide was coming in and the dinghy had floated away. Well, that's that, said Mrs. Grinling. We'll just have to walk home, Mr. Grinling groaned. They set off around the rocks. In and out, up and down, they went over and under rock after rock. Soon the sun had disappeared. The water came closer. We must hurry, Mr. G, said Mrs. Grinling. The tide is racing in. But Mr. Grinling couldn't hurry. I can't climb any more, he puffed, and I certainly can't climb through that hole. I'll get stuck. Mrs. Grinling looked at the hole and she looked at Mr. Grinling's tummy. In that case, there's nothing for it, she said. We'll have to stay here till morning. They found a flat rock and huddled together to keep warm. The moon came up. The water rose. Once a wave splashed their feet a little, but it was only once, and then the water began to go down.